Alright, so I'm going to demonstrate how to create a seamless repeatable texture. I've got the 3D viewer tab open as well as my files right here. So the material object, and here's the texture file that I'll be replacing with the one that I'm making. And if I just drag all three in right now, we should get the blank, or it's actually the example I made last time, but I'll make a new example to make sure that it's all set. I think I'm going to make some sort of animal texture. I was looking at some pictures to get an idea. Snake skin is pretty easy except for how many little parts there are, although there's ways to duplicate bits to get all of that filled in first. Or tiger or zebra stripe would be a nice kind of chaotic example to start with some basic detail and then fill it in. I think I'm going to try snake skin, see how I can make that look, because we've got these kind of cloudy brown and tan textures as well as these sort of stripes of black, and we've got this pattern of scale which is sort of like a grid. So I'm going to try to do that, and that'll give me a little bit of a challenge, but also show more than one technique. So first then, I'm going to go ahead and make a new document. I'm going to do this demonstration in Photoshop because I gave instructions for both programs. And we're going to want a nice square power of 2 texture size, so 2048 is a good default for you to use, although it's always good to go bigger. Sometimes that can make your files cumbersome, so 2048 is a pretty nice size. So I'm going to go ahead and just start this off with unlocking the background. I almost always do this just so I have the option to delete it entirely or do whatever I want to it. I just don't like having a locked background file right there. And I could just pretty much leave it at this color if I wanted to start off, because I've got kind of a beige on that snake skin. But I'm just going to put in whatever the light basic color is I think should fill up the entire background, just so I don't have any holes anywhere, something like that. And then I'm going to start to get my brushes to do the filling of those patterns. I think I'm going to need a ink brush this time, but let's go for, I've got a few different options like a blotchy ink. Let's see what this looks like. I'm going to get this into a blue, kind of a darker blue. So I've made a whole bunch of brushes, and we don't have to get into that right now, but being able to make brushes to change to suit your needs is a really powerful thing, and we're going to do that in a future demo. But for now, I'm just going to try to test these out and see, can I make the shapes? Okay, so now I've been painting on the background. I need to do this on a layer above so I have the ability to customize it however I want. And if you saw from that picture, we had some kind of basic blotchy shapes, although I think the spacing's way too big on this one for some reason. This is a very, yeah, this is a little bit too lumpy. Let's try how about a distressed ink? That's even more so. Okay, how about I'll just do a standard? I'll just fill it in however I want. Okay, that way I'm in control of when it's thick, when it's thin, and I don't have to rely on the brush to do so much for me. Alright, so initially I've got this big square area and nothing in it, and I need to put in some basic detail similar to this picture, but I need to keep in mind that anything that goes off the top is going to repeat on the bottom, anything that goes off the right is going to repeat on the left. And so initially I'm probably just going to fill in kind of a bland homogeneous kind of pattern that I can build off of as I work. And if I get near an edge, I'm going to try to think, okay, what is going to hook up over on this side? Probably going to be this coming down here, but we don't have to do all of that work just yet. So I'm going to make these sorts of patterns here, some thick and thin. I'll go over them a few times, but getting these exactly right would be more detail work than setup. And so I'm going to run through it fairly quickly so that we're not sitting here watching me just noodle with it all day. But I'll try to get some interesting things happening here so that I have a base to build upon. So this will just be one of the many patterns that you saw in that texture, just to get one part of it moving. And the first thing I'll recommend is that you use different layers for different kind of detail passes. It's going to be a little less convenient once you get to the offsetting and tiling part, but it's going to be far more convenient for everything else, for painting, for keeping your colors pure, for not having to work doubly or triply hard trying to fine-tune a part of this. Everything's easier when you separate it out into layers. Just don't go crazy and make it so many layers that it becomes cumbersome, and then you can't possibly navigate your own file. So I'm going to bring these somewhat close together, and then keep in mind that I'll bring them back in on the bottom here somewhere. And just kind of these big diamond or, you know, rectangle-ish shapes to fill in all this area. I can even sort of cheat a little bit. Let's see if I duplicate this layer and then scale it, rotate it, do something. I can probably fill in other areas of detail that are not quite filled in yet. I would just have to be judicious about erasing parts that get you messy. But so far, I think that's working out just fine. Let's go ahead and offset for the first time then. So I've got this big area in the center kind of filled in, and I'm going to go up to Filter, Other, Offset, and we need half the size of our document. So right now my numbers are all crazy because I was just doing random offset for our last example. So I was using 2048, so that's going to be 1024 as the perfect halfway. So we're just move that straight off, and now this would have been the center of that texture previously. This would have been the edge, and so you can see I was pretty close on lining that detail up. And I'll just say OK, and now I'll keep doing that same thing. Just going to fill it in some more. Trying to look at the reference I've got there and fill in relevant details. Give it some interest. If I can make it really random, then that's good, because we won't hone in on the same kind of shapes over and over and over again. But if I do something too random, like I do a little happy face over here, we'll definitely be able to pick that out from the noise and see, oh, that's that happy face again, because it's so different from everything else on the screen. Okay? So there's a balance between unique detail that doesn't look like it's just a printed pattern and unique detail that jumps out at you and makes it really obvious that you're doing a tiling effect. Okay, let's go ahead and link these over here, and see anything else. How about we cross over here like that. And I need to fill in this upper area a little bit. It's a little bit too wide. That's another thing, like if you have one tiny blocked off piece like that triangle, that can draw attention itself, or an especially large open area like this one. I think that right here I've got something that's coming down that I can match up, and then I just have to offset again to make sure that I did it satisfyingly. And let's just bring that way, and this one over here as well. Alright, so we'll say that's fine. I'm going to offset again. So filter, offset. I don't have to change the numbers. They should be the same as last time. And now I'm looking right in the center and along this horizontal line. You can actually see now a few places where I've created a seam by accident. So this is that detail that I was trying to match up top and bottom, and I want to make absolutely sure that I cover over it so that it doesn't look bizarre. Okay? Keep in mind that I don't want to paint anything on the edges when I offset, because that will create a new seam if I can help it. Sometimes you can't help it, and so you just have to do your best. So I'm checking down the middle to see if there are any new seams created. Not really, although this one almost doesn't match up, so I guess I'll fix that just a little bit. Get a couple little random errant edges, and this part right here definitely did not match up, so let's bring that across. Okay, something like this. Alright, so that should be fine. And here's one. Well, maybe that wasn't a mistake. That could just be detail. It's a nice thing about using a more natural pattern is that sometimes there can be mistakes in it and you won't even see them. Okay, I'm not seeing anything obvious, so I'm going to offset again. So this is the other position I painted in earlier just to recheck all these center lines. Aha! So here's one right here. So those are the most common places you're going to find the errors, is when you offset exactly by half, look in a cross section across the middle in both directions, and that's usually where you're going to find your errors. But after that, and just randomly sometimes, you could accidentally paint somewhere else and create a new error on a different part of the canvas. And so once you have a repeating pattern like this, you're going to want to offset a few random times just to kind of double check and see if everything's working okay and that you don't have any nasty surprises. Like there's a little piece right here I don't like. I don't know if that was an error initially, but I don't like it and I do want to remove it. Okay, vertically and horizontally, and I don't see anymore. Okay, so now I'm just going to go to the command one more time, filter other offset, and just start moving it little by little to look in all possible directions. And it shouldn't matter where I stop now because the whole thing is seamless. So as long as when I'm scrolling around I don't see lots of repeating shapes that I don't want to repeat, or big open areas that have no detail in them, then I should be okay to move on to my next step. So far I've got kind of a basic cracked ground look, which is close enough to my original concept that I can move on, although it's missing some of these little details and things, but we're not going to nitpick it to death. We're just going to move on. Okay? So that would be our first pattern. So I don't know what I would call this. We'll just call this big lines. Okay? Alright, so then next to my pattern I start to get these kind of soft fills in the larger areas, and then I'm going to have this diamond pattern all over. So I'll do another layer here. Come on, there we go. I'm going to put it underneath the lines because it's only really supposed to appear in these open areas, and I'm going to use a soft brush now to kind of fill in some of those areas. It looks like it was darker on one side and then kind of tapering to a lighter on the other side. So I'm going to use a eraser airbrush and a standard airbrush. And the reason I select both in here is because Photoshop has a hotkey on your pen to flip back and forth between your last selected eraser and your brush. So right now on my new layer, if I must have been on the wrong one. If I use my airbrush eraser, then I hit my pen button, then I can use my airbrush eraser there, and that makes it really, really convenient. Alright, so not every single one of those areas is filled in. Some of them have a little sort of blob in the middle, so like this, and it looks like actually it's also browner instead of being this gray. So let's move here. So I'll use this browner color, and I'm going to try to do most of my detail in the middle. So I'm going to fill in the center, switch to my airbrush, and then erase away in sort of a pattern. It looks like almost as if these scales have a sort of inner glow to them where they stay away from the line somewhat but sort of fill in the center like that. So we'll try that a few times. I'm going to fill in this one more heavily on one side, switch, and then erase away more tightly on this side. This, and then more loosely on this other side, kind of like that. That's sort of what I was seeing. Kind of an interesting effect there. I don't really like it being absolutely locked to that edge, so I'm going to just bring it on a little bit further here and here. Okay, so if I've got to do this many different times, eventually I'm going to want to do one which is right next to an existing one like this. So I just filled that in, and now I want to switch to my eraser, but when I do that, I start taking away parts from this neighboring cell. So that's why we use temporary layers. Make a new layer, do my pigment and my shaping, like this, and now I don't have any chance of accidentally bumping into the detail in the neighboring cells, so I can do whatever I want. As soon as I like it, then I can Control E to merge down, make a new temporary layer, and do it again. Okay, just to save a little bit of time, I oftentimes will do like one over on this side of the canvas and this one at the same time because they're nowhere near each other. I could also probably throw this one into the bargain because they're separate enough I could do all three. So then I will go ahead and erase this one out, and this one. This time I'll let it be a little bit tighter on that side. And then finally this one over here, I do think I want this one to be a little bit more shaped and broad, just like that. Okay, So as soon as I like all of those, then I will merge them down. So we've got one layer for all of those blurry details, and then I'll just continue on and try to do as many as I can before I have to move the canvas orientation. I can try doing this one, though I can see it's going to come over here, so maybe I shouldn't even bother for the moment. That one I definitely can't down there. Okay, so nice blurry shape here. I'll just try to get that one started a little bit, but I'm going to need to offset before I can do that for sure. This one be okay, and then this one I'll let be. Actually, I don't want too many of the sharp ones right up lined up in the vertical, so I'm going to make this one a blurry one also. So something you'll find with texturing repeating patterns is if you line too many things up diagonally or vertically, then it's going to make them more conspicuous and you're going to see that effect over and over again. So try to dot them all over the place instead. Do a couple right there. And yeah, that's almost okay, this one as well. And put just that should be okay. Alright, so now I'm going to need to offset. Let's go ahead and save my file though, because I haven't done so yet. So I'm going to save as to the desktop. We could call this just like snake. Snake. I can spell, I swear. Skin for now as a PSD. And I'm not yet applying it to my barrel because I know that this is tiling right now, but that's very simple. And I just want to get this second layer done at least before I check. But it would be a good idea to check early, because if you're not at all sure that the tiling is working, then that's going to be the thing that will verify it, is putting it on the actual barrel. Alright, so I've got my two layers. This one's like the gradient layer, and I'm going to have to offset both of them now. So filter other offset. I want to make sure it's the exact same amount, so I'm going to go back to our 1024 by 1024 offset. So there the gradients are offset. Now I need to do it with the big lines. Okay, so we're in our other orientation now. Select the correct layer and I can keep working. Actually, let's do a temporary layer so I don't mess up what I've already got. There we go. I'll put that in the left-hand portion of this and then start fading them out. That one didn't seem to... Oh, it's because I've got detail on this underneath layer. Okay, well, I'll have to do that one last. Or, actually, you could fix that just by getting rid of that and doing all this work on this upper layer. Might as well. There we go. I'll fade that out just a little bit. Okay, and where was my other one? So those were my three. So that's good. I don't need to put this everywhere. And I think I may have already gone too far. No, some of them are pretty significantly dark. So I'm looking at my reference again. That's why it's always good to have the reference. This is pretty dark, this one here. And it's got a very interesting shape. Some of them it looks like flames almost, but we've got this kind of characteristic pattern that I'm not really observing yet. So let me try that. I'm going to get my eraser. Is that my eraser? Oh, I'm on the wrong layer. Yeah, so that's my eraser. And I'm going to kind of cut out this shape in the middle like that, but also redarken this side of this horseshoe, because that's what it looked like was happening. I'll do that in a couple of places, like one up here, one there, and where else? The small ones don't tend to have it, but I could do it right here. So I want to make sure that I'm staying faithful to the idea, allowing it to be as dark as it needs to. Okay. Doing okay. And we'll just say that that's good. So I want to check that I didn't accidentally create any bad seams on my textures. This one's already fine, so let's just do the standard offset one more time with that. I'll merge these layers even though I don't think I did anything on that other one. Standard offset. And as long as I don't see any seams right down the middle in this cross section, we should be fine. We could do the random offset thing again, but I'm pretty certain that we don't have any problems there because I stayed well away from the edges most of the time. So we're just about ready to test, but let's test it. Let's go ahead and test it because we might as well, model good behavior by not going too far before checking. So I need a PNG. I have a tiling tube folder, and this tube texture is the file that we are going to be linking to. So named exactly the same with the same file extension. We're going to replace it. Okay. So then I'm going to drag those 3 files into the viewer. And there it goes. And we can take a look. Okay. So I'm looking for any errors or anything. Usually helps to hit this button because then it's upright. You can spin all the way around. Okay. Not too bad. So for a nice little base pattern, it's working. It could be concrete with a lot of cracks, or mud or wood or something like that, but we really don't have enough detail yet to say for sure that that's a snake. So I would like to give it at least the scale pattern. So this pattern here. Now, as you can see, it's a very regular pattern. It's just like a diamond grid, and generally it looks like whatever color the skin is, the grid, the lines on the grid are either lighter on the dark ones or darker on the light ones. So it's sort of a difference blending mode I'm going to have to use. So I'm going to try this. On a new layer here, I'm going to just use the line tool, just the perfect line tool. And I'm going to pick a relatively gray neutral tone. I hope that this will work. If not, then I can recolor it all white or black or something. So I'm just going to use this, and I'm going to hold down Shift and just make a vertical line like that. And that's very, very thin, but that's probably what's called for here. See, I'm at 3 pixels. Let's go for, let's see what 5 looks like. Okay, 5's okay. So here's where I'm going to determine the size of the scales. I want them to be nice and tight and small. So something like this. Then I can either duplicate this layer by holding down Option while I drag it with the movement tool. That will do this. And if I hold down Shift, I can space them out like that, right next to themselves, and combine. Okay. Or I can grab with my selection tool, and I think I can do the same thing with the selection tool, and it doesn't even create a new layer. Let's just make sure it does that. Yeah, didn't even create a new layer. So I'm doing this upright because it's easier to get them all parallel and nicely spaced upright. And then as I have more of them, rather than copying the same 1 or 2, I'm going to grab the new group and drag the entire group. That way I get more of this done quickly. Okay. And luckily, since there's no variance at all in this, I can just quickly drag them straight across. So okay, we're good so far. This is going to end up being a diagonal pattern though, and I'm going to try to make it tile nicely before I copy the whole thing. So let's start right now by rotating this. Actually, first I'm going to duplicate it, and then rotating this 90 degrees. And I just want to look at my reference and see, is this the shape that those are, or are they at a slightly different angle? I think this will do, but if I wanted a slightly different angle, then I could get that right now. So I could create more long, squat diamonds this way, or taller, thinner diamonds this way, and then copy those. So just for the sake of argument, let's make taller, thinner diamonds like that. And since all of this is spaced virtually identically, I should be able to just merge both of them. If you're at all unsure, just copy one of your bits first and turn it off, and then merge your other two. And so now I can set this diamond pattern upright, and I'm probably going to want to use rulers to make sure that it is vertical. So I'm going to drag a vertical ruler, And as I rotate, I'm going to just see when it's going through one row of these diamonds. I'm using arrow keys to tap it to the left, and I'm just trying to get it perfectly upright so that it's easiest to double check. It looks like the way that I made my pattern is a little bit imperfect. That's okay. We can just fudge it a little bit to make it perfect once we're copying it. That's pretty close, it looks like. Very nearly there. Something like this. It's about maybe a little more. So I'm tracking that upward. Did I end up going too far? Let's see. Alright, we'll say that's going to be fine. So now I've got this diagonal diamond pattern, and I'm going to trim off these extra large bits here, and let's get rid of my guides. Clear the guides. Stop showing the ruler, because these things, they automatically stick to the guide sometimes. There's a way to turn that off, but I just don't like to use them very long anyway. Okay, so I'm going to trim off these extra bits here so that I end up with one big diamond. And then I'm going to copy and paste it next to itself to try to create a sort of endless pattern of these diamonds. And we'll probably end up getting some bad tiling at first, but a little bit of judicious scaling and fudging the thing will probably fix that up. So here I've got one diamond, so I'll just say diamond, and I'm going to copy it so that I can just mess around with this other one, not have to look for one unaltered version. I'm going to grab the whole thing and copy, wrong layer, there we go, and copy and paste, or just option drag. So if I'm holding shift, it will only go 45 degrees or 0 or 90 degrees, and that's not what I need. I need this other angle, and so I can't even really hold shift to do this. I'm going to have to line it up by eye. So I left some of those extra little bits hanging out there to see how closely will this match up, and it looks like it's pretty close. So that's good news. Okay. Just a couple taps, and you know what, that's going to be close enough. Nobody's ever going to tell the difference, and I can seal up those little imperfections right there. So I'm going to hit enter. I'm going to hit enter. Okay, I think it must have placed it already. So now I can hold shift and drag it to the left, and it will line up exactly as I want it to. Okay, there we go. Trying to double check that all of the lines are matching up. It looks like they're matching close enough. Okay. Then let's deselect and grab the whole layer. If you have detail off the layer, sometimes it will get cut off like this, and so we can't just drag this around anywhere we want. But I'm going to go ahead and paste. No, I'm going to grab the whole layer again, drag it down this way. Got a hold option. If they are overlapping, when you stop, it shouldn't really matter. It may occasionally make them appear darker, the lines, but only a little bit, unless you have transparent line work. So here I'm lining them up, watching carefully down here, using arrow keys. So this might, yeah, because some of the lines were not perfectly spaced, it might make them look a little bit thicker than before. As long as we don't get like a double line effect, we're okay. And let's turn off these just to see more clearly. So you can see the imperfections there, but they're so minor I'm not going to really even worry about that. Yeah, so let's keep copying and pasting. I should be able to grab from virtually any part of this now and then just drag it over and line it up carefully. Some of them will be appearing a little bit thicker or thinner, but it's a natural shape. And in fact, you know what? Let's rotate this upside down so that I've got the thicker parts are up here now. Ooh, apply, is that going to let me? Okay, yeah, it still lets me drag it. And I'll bring it down like this. There you go, a little bit further. Right about there or so. Yep, little bits here and there. If I really cared about that, then I could start filling them in by hand. So if I grab let's do my ink standard brush. I've got the right color selected. Get my pen down to the correct size. Then if we just tap and then hold shift and tap, it's going to allow us to make perfectly straight lines. But I'm less concerned about these little gaps as I am with what's going to happen when I offset it, because at that point we might need to actually skew the thing a little bit. And we can see it's so small, it's not going to really make a difference. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and grab a big section of this. Let's do a section like this, because that's what I'm going to need. Option, dragging down, try to line it up. And I like to make sure they're overlapped at least a bit so that they're integrating with the existing pattern nicely. Makes it easier to see if I can see a little pixels around there or not. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, you're fine. I'm going to grab one more little bit. Okay, I believe that's lined up. So if you did calculations with this to figure out exactly how big or how small this had to be, you could get a very perfect lineup of your pattern. I'm doing it all by hand and by eye. You absolutely do not have to do that, and sometimes you shouldn't. See, I'm getting a double line right there. If you want to get a very nice effect, then you're probably going to want to think this out more and get some sort of fraction of the canvas size as how large your shapes and patterns are, at least. Or when in doubt, start with a square pattern, because square patterns can always be copied and pasted next to each other without any issue at all. Okay, a little bit more. Any other pattern, like those swirling shapes I was making earlier, obviously that has to be sewn up by hand, but these shapes should be able to be duplicated mathematically. I'm just not setting it up in a way to make that perfect and easy. Okay, and I got a couple little holes left here and there. Nice thing is, if I do have thicker and thinner lines all over the place, it looks less conspicuous than if I just have them in one or two spots. So suddenly we can't tell that that's so much a problem as just kind of a variance in the detail. A little bit more. Alright, we'll say that's fine. So now let's offset this, and I'm going to leave it all by itself. We don't need the other layers of detail to do this. So filter, other, offset, let's make sure it's on half, and it is. And so now we can see those seams, and now we've got to fix those seams up. So I can't change what's going on with the texture on the edges here, but if there's just a little bit of error like this, it's possible to use some warping tools, or maybe even just draw over them to try to fix them a little bit. Yeah, so the pattern is a little rough. Let's do this. I'm going to un-offset it. So I just did Control Z, and I'm going to contrive to have the tip of a diamond on all of the edges. So I'm going to warp the entire thing. So what I mean by that is that right through this center, I'm going to try to make that hit this upper edge, and I'm trying to make this hit the side edges. Same thing over on this side, the right hand side. This part I want to hit the side edge, and the same thing on the bottom. That will make the duplication of the texture much easier. So I'm just going to transform the entire thing, and I'm not going to hold shift because I want to skew this just a bit. I'm going to zoom in. There we go. So I've got half of that approximately going off the side of the canvas. Over on this side I'll do the same thing. Just stretch it out a little bit. Half of it going off the canvas. Is this one possible to bring in? No, it is. Just make sure I got no holes. Bring it off just a little bit more, just like that. And then on the bottom, same thing. Okay, so losing just a tiny bit of texture detail by doing that. Hit enter, but it should be okay. The one danger of doing something like that is that when we use filter, other, offset, if there are pixels off the canvas, then they might be moved in part of that calculation when we're offsetting this layer, and that would mess up our tiling. So what I mean by that is I just scaled this larger than the canvas, and that means there's actually pixels over here that we can't see. So what you might need to do is trim the layer first. If you go to Image, Trim, then what this will do is say, based on what, I don't think it actually matters for us, but we're going to trim away the top, left, bottom, and right. That does matter. And so this means that all of those, so you can see the bounding box now snaps to the grid, all of those pixels that were off the layer are now no longer existing. It just stops right at the edge of this document. So that should have helped a lot. Let's do Filter, Other Offset. Yeah, it's just about perfect now without any editing at all. So there's a little bit of a glitchiness here, right? You can see. And so probably what I'd do for this kind of homely handmade version is just make new lines that go correctly across this diagonal, and then switch back and forth between that and a hard eraser. That's what I'm going to want now. Hard transparent eraser is fine. And fixing up the lines myself just little by little. Okay, so that would be probably what I'd end up doing. I could also just make new long lines across the center here and then duplicate them if I found the exact right dimensions that I would need to use. But for the sake of this demo, I think that's nice enough. You really can't see it until you zoom way in. And this is supposed to be one of many layers, so it's probably going to be hidden by all this other detail anyway, so we don't have to worry about it too much. Let's try though, and I'm going to save. Let's try to apply a blending mode over top of this to see if it gets the effect that I saw with the snakeskin. And I'm thinking difference is kind of what I wanted. Probably a bit too extreme. We are seeing lighter in the dark stripes, darker in the light areas. Let's try something else. How about, so overlay is far too light. And once you select one, you can just use the arrow keys to tap through like this. But let's see, so that's really, really subtle. Linear light's a little bit more obvious. Ugh. Difference is far too intense. I could turn down the opacity. Exclusion, no. No. Okay, it's not really working. There's two options here. Luminosity is kind of nice, but that's just kind of like what we already had. Normal. So there's a couple options here. I could find a nice blending mode and make it work properly. Or I could copy this layer, because it is tiling nicely twice, and put one as a clipping mask of these lines to get one kind of effect, and another one not, and put it underneath these lines. So let's do that just for the sake of demonstration, because it's a nice technique. I'm going to copy this whole layer, and I'm going to put one underneath the lines, but above the gradient in the background. This other one I'm going to put right above the lines, and I'm going to set it as a clipping mask. Okay, so if I turn these ones off, now you should see the lines are only visible where there were dark lines already. Okay, but they still line up perfectly with the other set. Okay, so that means with this one I can turn down the opacity maybe, or mess with the blending mode. Let's see, what can we get? Definitely needs to be lighter, but not crazy. So something like that's okay. Then if I turn on this other one, I could set this other one to like multiply or color burn or something. And then we get a nice kind of blending across the two different types of detail with a more customized kind of effect. Okay, something like that. Cool. Alright, let's see how this applies. I'm going to hit Save, File, Save As, go to my folder, here, PNG, snakeskin, the tube texture.png, place it, and let's drag it into the 3D viewer. Here we are. 1, 2, 3 different files. Drag them in. Okay, there we go. Looking a lot more like snakeskin. Cool. I don't think I'm done just yet. I'm liking the effect. I think it's overall working pretty nicely. and I'm not really seeing the downside of the improper tiling that I was doing. It's just too subtle. You really can't tell very easily. But let's take one more look back at this snakeskin, and there's a detail that I'm kind of leaving out here, in that all of those tiles have a little bit of lighting on them. Just a little bit. Some of them have a full-on highlight, which is nice, but all of them have this kind of slight triangular dark portion on the bottom of them. And I think that would just be one extra little nice detail that could really put this over the top and start making it look really nice. Also, that dark detail, again, is not visible in the darker portions like here, but it is visible in the lighter portions. So that means in our layer order, I probably want it to occur just above the background here. And those highlights would have to be basically on top of everything, maybe behind these lines. Okay. So I'm going to make a new layer, and we'll just say this is what is it? Triangle shade, because that's what it's going to end up being. I'm going to zoom way in to one of these diamonds, okay, and just make a little bit of detail. I'm looking at my reference for what kind of color I should be using. I think it's just kind of like this brown. Let's use a darker one so that I have the option. I'm going to use my airbrush and airbrush eraser. Okay. Shrink that way down and just kind of darken in. I must be on the wrong one. There we go. There we go. So I'm just going to darken down the bottom of one of these cells like that. And then using my airbrush eraser, fade it out, and then tightening it up so that I can trim away from the sides like that. So that's all I really want, that. So now I'm going to copy and paste that all over the entire freaking thing. Okay? So it's a lucky thing that I just showed you how to duplicate a pattern, because that would be hellish if you didn't know how to do that. So I'm just going to copy this to the next cell, to the neighbor. Okay? Then grab them both, copy them both down like this. And if they're perfectly lined up, great. If they're not, meh. Okay, now I'm going to grab that whole diamond, do that, and again, and again. And I'm just going to keep doing that, and each time I do it, it's going to be less work, because now I've got a bigger diamond that I can start copying. And if you want to, you could do a few with just one of these like that. Get a nice larger portion. Just watching to make sure they're still lining up. If they start to drift a little bit like this, then with Control T, and I believe it's holding down Control, we can kind of skew. It's a little hard to see because of the extra details that I've got, so I'm just going to undo that, turn off these details so I can actually see what I'm doing. I want to be able to see that. There we go. And so now I'm going to use Control T and hold down Control. There we go, so I can make it match right there. Just be careful not to make them wildly not match the pattern. Just a little subtle adjustment is good. They start wandering. Duplicate it again. Just like that. You can see now, for some reason, this one is too big, so I'm going to put it back. Okay? Just down to the imperfections in the pattern when I first made it. So there we go, we've got a small section, and I can take this and just keep doing that. I think if I go down to the right, then all of those spacings should continue to line up for the most part, although you can see the farther I go, the more it's like deviating from the original pattern. So I'm not really sure what that's attributable to, but I can just use the same trick. There we go, bring it back in line. If it's wandering off just a little bit, that's fine. Just not too much. Okay, and now I can keep doing it with more. And I am going to want it to go right off the side, but it would be better probably if I offset this and then did the sides and corners, because I'm just going to have to fix the mess I will make anyway if I do that too early. let's see if I can fill up the center first instead. Just checking, tap it into place, and then anything that's not quite matching, hold down Control with the transform tool and get it back into line. I think this needs to come up just a bit. And this one too. This one does. So you can see how picky you can be, but really, I mean, we're not going to need to be that picky. It's going to look fine. As soon as we zoom out, you're not going to, see that effect anymore. And anyway, this shading effect is supposed to be more subtle than that. If you look on my reference, you really can't hardly see it at all. So watch, as soon as I change this to multiply and then turn down the opacity, we're looking for something more like this. Okay, so it's going to be very, very subtle. We're not going to need to be nearly as picky as I'm being. Alright, so let me go ahead and fill up the rest of this center. I'll just go ahead and do as much of it as I can. So I'm going to be much more cavalier about it, and we'll see if we can tell where I've been sloppy. I bet you we will. Oh yeah, I can see it already. But you guys know how to be careful, so make sure you do it the right way for your own assignment. I just don't want to take too much time up here. Okay, and offset this way. Oh, what's going on? Oh, jeez, that was bad. Let's grab this as a shape like that. Okay, and then there's just a couple places where I need to fill it in. Again, we're going to get little bits of mess from doing it this sloppy, but you could always just work a little bit neater than I am. Alright, we'll say that's fine. I won't even offset it because I just want to see the effect complete. And then, since we can't see it in the darker areas, we do want to have a few edge highlights, and I think I'll just do those by hand. So it has to be above everything, but I don't want it to be a part of this clipping mask, so I'm going to make another layer all the way up here. We'll say this is our highlight. And for this one, I'm just going to grab a lighter, let's say bluer color, zoom in a lot. Okay, on brush, and that's it. Right, that's all I'm going to do. So that, and I'm not even going to do it on every scale. I'm just going to pick a bunch like this, kind of just scattered around. In the reference, it was because the snake body was kind of tilting in a new direction, but I'm just kind of scattering these around to get a sensation that some are facing one way, some are facing the other way. And then as soon as I've got enough, same trick as always, I can just grab that, duplicate it around a little bit. As long as we position it roughly on the scales properly, like that, we shouldn't be able to tell that I duplicated this because the pattern that I painted was so random already. Especially if I move it little bits every time I do this. Okay. Any last thing? So let's do a color dodge. Turn that down a little bit. Let's see. How about overlay? Find a blending mode. Actually, overlay all by itself kind of looks okay. Got a little bit shiny. Soft light, hard light. That turns that very blue, which is kind of neat. Vivid light, hard light. All right, hard light, and then I'll turn it down just a little. So then any final adjustments I want to make, but while I'm testing this, I think that I do want to turn down the opacity of the exclusion part quite a lot. Okay, we're going to underplay that significantly. And then this diamond one, I think this one's fine, though. And we could also do other things like run filters over this, like we could blur our shapes, like these big line shapes. But keep in mind, if you blur those shapes, at the edge of the frame, it's probably not going to work so well, and you're going to have to fix it there anyway. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this, and I will save as a PNG and apply it one more time. As long as it looks nice, then we're pretty much there. Any sort of noodling or detail work that I want to do, I have the layers available. I could redo any of these layers, just throw them away, do them brand new if I wanted to, or fix any small inconsistencies that we see. So there it was before my adjustment. There it is with my adjustment, and yeah, it gives it a little something, some little highlights. Something I don't want to do is apply a big gradient over the entire thing. Okay? Sometimes this happens, like people will use a texture like this and they'll say, oh, well, it's lighter at the top and darker at the bottom, and so I want my texture to do that. Hopefully you can predict what's going to happen when I do this, but let's just see. Okay, so this will be big gradient.
I think it'll look beautiful.
It'll look beautiful is what's going to happen, yeah. I'll just use the two colors I have with an adjustment layer. But one thing I am going to do is I'm going to start right here up at the top, and I'm going to hold shift when I use my gradient tool to snap it to this vertical orientation. That will make sure that if you offset it, it would tile with itself. So this will already tile. So let's do this as a overlay, I think. Ugh, gross. Okay. Overlay, and I'll turn it down a little bit. No. Color burn. Alright, color burn, fine. So I've got dark at the bottom, light at the top. Let's save this again. Ugh, I don't really like it at all. Let's save this again and see what it looks like with this applied, though.
It's not going to look beautiful if you don't like it.
Yeah, but will the effect work at all? How about that? Alright, so same three files. Ooh, didn't let me grab it. There we go. Okay, so that's what ends up happening, right? Because this is supposed to tile with itself. If it's light in the top, then once it gets down to the bottom and it's dark, it immediately resets itself to light again. So that doesn't work. Okay. Horizontally, though, look at horizontal. It's nice and smooth and continuous around this way, because that gradient that I applied was locked horizontally. Actually, okay, I'm not sure if that's the highlight's fault or the gradient's fault, but we do have a little scene right there. Tough to tell at this stage which part of what I'm doing is the problem there. We do have blur tools to solve that, or maybe it's that I applied it just a little bit crooked or something like that. But really the obvious one is this one, this vertical one. Okay? If you did want to have some detail like that and have it work, what we could do is use this one and make sure that we don't touch the edges entirely. So this time, hold shift again. I'm going to go like this. Yeah, I think that works. So now I've got dark on the top, dark on the bottom, light in the middle, and locked horizontally. This one should actually tile correctly, I believe. Let's try it. Not that it's going to look great or anything, but it will tile correctly. So it's just going to oscillate between light and dark, light and dark, light and dark, over and over, but smoothly. Come on. Never lets me drag them the first time. There we go. So now this actually does work. So if I zoom way in, I can see errors. I think that's more to do with the little highlights on the diamonds that I was doing. But you can see how now we do have light, dark, light, light, dark, light, dark, and it works properly. Okay. Clap, clap. All right. Any questions about that process that I showed? Setting the texture up, making it tile, adding detail layers, giving myself options, etc. Offset options. What about offset options? No, it does not have to be snakeskin. Snakeskin was just the example that I picked. Any other questions? they're half of your canvas size.
Gotcha.
So if you choose a texture that is 1024, then your offset will be half of that, which is 512. If you did a 4K texture, which is really just 4,000 straight across, then yours would be 2,000 to offset it. Okay, yes, Salvo. Nope. I think he's typing it. Yes. Yep. This one, I have not really taught in this course any photo manipulation yet, but since you can do photo manipulation, go ahead and try to. If you would rather just paint the whole thing like I've done, go ahead and paint the whole thing. That's what I'd recommend for most people right now, is to just paint it by hand, because I have not talked about any brush creation, any photo manipulation, anything like that. But we're going to get into that shortly. Okay, very good. Alright, you guys, if that's it, then that's the end of our demo for today.